All right, so it's been quite a while since I've made a video. I changed the name of the channel. Did that because people were saying they had trouble finding it, and also because I think my name's pretty common. So this way it should be easier for people. I also got rid of all the old videos. That's because I've sort of crossed a threshold where in the past, over the last couple of years, I had been basically just if you watch the previous videos, I was talking about like all these bizarre experiences I had, and I was sort of just like trying to tie it all together into something coherent that made sense. And I wasn't really able to do that. And I've been working on this for a number of years now. And the last like 6, 7 months, I've been mostly just like focusing entirely on that. But now I have what I would call essentially a coherent framework from first principles, explaining how reality works. I established this essentially through focusing entirely on manifestation and how like what is causing like things that are happening in my mind to then occur in my external reality. And so I've just been like really focusing on that. And I finally feel confident that I could say that I have something pretty that I think is gonna pretty much blow a lot of people's minds. Essentially, I would say that this is the closest thing that I've found to this is the Tao Te Ching. And what I'm confident I can do at this point is essentially explain everything that that book's saying and then point out the things that it's missing. And also what I feel confident saying, and I get that this is going to be kind of a big claim, but what I feel this does is pushes both Eastern and Western spirituality forward in a way that I feel like kind of been both have been just stuck in the mud for a long time. Eastern spirituality has been stuck for like 2,500 years, and what I have here is going to expand upon that. It's gonna it's not really gonna actually it's not gonna expand upon it. It's just gonna totally transcend it. Essentially, what I've discovered is that like it's just wrong. So what this is today, I'm just going to be laying out this framework that I have, and it's essentially six axioms. And this is just I need to make this video first because I'm gonna tell people to come back and look at this one because as I'm giving out more and more information, people are gonna ask a bunch of questions, and I'm gonna be like, well, you got to go back and watch that one because that's gonna tell you like the basis for how I got to this point. So the first axiom is just like kind of maybe doesn't even need to be an axiom because it's so obvious, but like the existence just is like we are here. I can't necessarily prove that existence must be the case, but I can prove logically that it has to be that something must exist rather than nothing. So a second axiom, we're just trying to start from like the very base level, most foundational starting point, and I would say that that's the logic. So axiom two is coherence is the necessary condition for anything to exist or appear. Anything that contradicts logic just cannot be. Essentially, what this is saying is just that something that you cannot have something both be true and false at the same time. You can't have something both exist and not exist simultaneously. So logic is the absolute precondition that determines which possibilities are permitted at all. So every form, event, or phenomenon that can appear must already satisfy logic's demands. Anything that would require a true paradox, it simply just cannot and never will be. And there are no true paradoxes. I know a lot of people make videos that get like millions of views that try to say that like, oh, look at all these paradoxes that exist, but when you really break each of them down, there's always some sort of error that they're making. Either it's like a linguistic trick or there's some sort of like false equivocation. So like for example, one paradox that a lot of people point to is the liar's paradox, which is essentially a statement that just says, open quote, this statement is false, close quote. And essentially the reason this is not a paradox is because the sentence, it's self-referential. It's not, a sentence needs to point to something. It needs to have a subject that's existing in reality. When you're just talking about a sentence, like what they're saying is that if the statement is true, then it's referencing itself that it's false, and then that's why they're saying it's a paradox. But the issue is that the statement doesn't have any meaning since it's not referring to anything in reality. So you can't really say that it's actually like a real paradox. Another one that people point to is this barber paradox. So this one says, in a village, the barber shaves all and only those men who do not shave themselves. And then they pose the question, so does the barber shave himself? And they say it's paradoxical because if he shaves himself, then he belongs to the group of men who shave themselves. But the rule says the barber shaves only men who do not shave themselves. So if he shaves himself, he should not shave himself. That's essentially they're saying that's a paradox. But the real issue here is that they're not proving that a paradox actually exists. All they're proving is that this supposed barber as defined cannot exist, which that's fine. That doesn't change anything about reality itself. When we're talking about uh, the law of non-contradiction, we're not saying that it's impossible to come up with a linguistic um, analogy or explanation that invalidates itself. Like clearly, you can come up with something like that, but that doesn't say anything about reality. So everything that appears does so. I mean, even including the creator. Like absolutely, it must include the creator. That's what this axiom is saying. Everything that appears, it does so only by fulfilling logic's requirement, which is the law of non-contradiction. So, and it also leads to the logical deduction that nothingness itself literally cannot exist. It's because the moment it is treated as existing, it is no longer nothing. And so people could point to like empty space and say, "Oh, nothing exists there," but that's not the case. Like there's like air particles or whatever there. Like there's something there, and you can move through it. It's just it's not nothing. It's empty space is something. So what I'm saying is that like there like logically for nothing to exist, there would have to be somewhere that it existed, but then becomes something. So that's why you have to have existence. And I can't necessarily prove that it must be the case. I've tried really hard to do that, and I couldn't. But we know, as Axiom 1 says, and as we all know, like we're existing here, so it's definitely the case. Axiom 3. The creator's defining essence is wholeness. So if the creator is truly whole, it cannot need, acquire, or do or act in any way to complete itself. And like I figured this out due to the way that I was sort of trying to understand manifestation, because I went through this whole process of like really breaking down each of these incidents that I experienced and trying to isolate what exactly it was that was causing things to work in my favor in some cases and then against my favor in others. And the ultimate conclusion that I came to was that the only way that positive manifestations were occurring was when I was aligning with this concept of wholeness itself. And so once I realized that, then that's what led me to the conclusion that the creator must be whole, since I'm presuming I'm a node of the creator, and I'll get into that. But that's just my anecdotal experience. I can prove this logically. So premise one, the ultimate ground must be self-sufficient. And when I'm talking about ultimate ground, what I'm saying is the most fundamental essence of being, whatever it is at the very bottom layer that underpins everything. That's what we might mean by ultimate ground. It has to be self-sufficient. So if it depends on anything outside itself to be what it is, then it's not ultimate. It means there's something more foundational that's underpinning it. Premise two, anything incomplete depends on what it lacks. If a thing is missing something necessary to its being, then it is not complete in itself. Premise three, what depends on external completion is not self-sufficient. So then the conclusion is that the ultimate ground cannot be incomplete, it must be whole. And wholeness, I would define it as a completeness that the wholeness of the creator I would define as completeness that contains infinite movement as potential. And the movement happens at the node level, which, as I was just referencing, the node level was what I would define as you and I. And by node, I would call that a localized instantation of consciousness, or like a localized consciousness unit, which, so what I'm saying is that, so the one itself, the creator itself is whole, and it's localized its consciousness in this body here and your body as you're listening. And then we each have our own separate history and past that's turned us into these people that we are today. So movement happens at the node level, and it doesn't happen at the ones level. So you could look at it like this. The one is like an unchanging game, and nodes are like the players exploring the meta of the one's infinite lattice. So wholeness is like the condition of self-containment, like complete self-containment, in which nothing exists outside, nothing's required, and all differentiation exists within the one. So a being rooted in wholeness can never act from lack except within illusion. And what I mean by that is I would define what we're experiencing now as illusion. Like life itself is illusion. And the reason I come to that conclusion is about a year or so ago, I went into this VR headset arcade place, and I put on one of these headsets. You go into their little private studio room, and it's just like a big empty room, and then you put on the headset, and then you can enter like different worlds. And in one of the games that we were playing, there were all these escalators, like you know how like they have in like airports, just like long straight escalators. And in the game, this game they had them. So as I'm standing on this escalator, I kept noticing like the sensation of feeling like the ground underneath my feet was moving. But like logically, I knew that the ground that I was standing on was totally flat and unmoving. But every time I stepped on these escalators, I kept getting this sensation that I was like moving. And what that tells me is that it's not actual movement in life, like that's generating that feeling that movement is occurring. It's my brain is decoding the visual input that I'm getting from the VR headset, and it's seeing that apparent movement is occurring, like apparent meaning like seeming, like it's seeming like movement's occurring, and then it creates that sensation in my body. And so then from there I can extrapolate essentially that everything works like that. Like you can even like taste, like different tastes of different foods. You can presume like that they don't necessarily have their own intrinsic taste. Now, I get that I might lose some people on that concept, so don't worry about that too much right now. I'm not gonna expand on that idea because it's an interesting thing to talk about, and there are very valid reasons for why I would say that. But that's not the point of this video. This video is essentially just laying out the background so that I can tell people later, go back and look at this one. So so wholeness can never act from lack except within illusion. So you're a node of the one, so you are whole, and you can act from lack because you're within illusion. So what it means to act from lack is to presume your life circumstances have some sort of ontological meaning about your essence. And what I mean by that is like the essence of your being, you're acting as if it's somehow diminished because of some missing thing in your life. And this is what I would mean by wholeness can never act from lack except within illusion. So you and this is the thing about manifestation. It's actually at the center of everything. Is this concept of wholeness, because there's not actually something anything that you really need to fix. And I get that that probably doesn't make necessarily make a ton of sense until you get through the rest of this framework. But the point is that when you think that your life circumstances have some sort of meaning on as to like your ontological status or like the like it means something about your essence in some sort of negative way, then you're acting from lack. But the one can never do that since it's operating as the game itself, not as one of the nodes. So all of creation is simply the unfolding of completeness within itself. So nothing evolves. The creator's not evolving. It's not trying to understand anything. It's not trying to learn anything. It is already complete in itself, and everything that's happening is just an unfolding of that completeness. Any perspective of the creator that gives it needs, desires, or motives negates this concept. And anybody who tries to claim that the creator uses these experience reality to learn or experience or evolve are all smuggling in lack at the foundational level. So if the computer could, or if the creator could improve or become more whole, it would be starting from a place of deficiency, which is structurally impossible. So the moment you imagine the creator needing something, you've already replaced it with a partial being within a larger context. And as a node, as I said before, your pure essence is the same identical wholeness. It's not something that you earned, it just is. So reality four, or I'm sorry, axiom four is that reality it operates on an unbreakable binary structure. And so it's like this concept of like ones and zeros, as is the case in computing. And when it comes to computing, it's actually an incredible metaphor, an analogy. It's an incredible analogy for how reality works, computing. What I found is that, and I'm going to continually return to this, and it's going to be one of the very primary things because when we look at how computers work and then we extrapolate that onto how reality works, it fits like a glove. And this is one thing that I've really never heard anybody else say. Maybe other people have said it. If that's the case, you can let me know. Uh, but when you really consider this, like everything exists in binary, either like on, off, present, absent, true, false, right? And and then this binary can also express on like gradients. So like a spectrum. So like autism fits on a spectrum. Beauty is on a spectrum. And the spectrum is essentially just like two poles, right? And then like a line between them. So those two poles are that same binary, and everything is just like on exists on it. I would say that there's nothing that you could find that doesn't exist uh, in this way. So this concept of duality essentially is the idea that there's two irreducible forces or substances, each with its own claim primacy. Though obviously, once you accept that the creator is whole, you can't stand in duality at all. So this binary axiom it does a number of things. First, it closes this two powers loophole. Duality frameworks posit two ultimate forces, but never explain where the two arise from, how they relate, or what binds them together, or what holds them together, I guess. The relationship remains undefined, or the framework falls into infinite regress. Binary axiom shows that only the one and its display are necessary. All apparent two-ness is an artifact of expression within an undivided ground. It also stops the collapse into endless gray zones. So duality systems blur the line between source and expression. A spectrum remains, but the ground disappears. Truth and illusion become confusing. So and then it also exposes duality as a confusion of levels. So dualistic systems treat the spectrum of gradations and opposites as the foundation of reality. This axiom shows that all such opposites are modes of the one, not independent powers. This is like a recurring theme in both Eastern and Western metaphysics. So it locks out the possibility of rival creators or cosmic battles or a split source, like good versus evil or God versus Satan. Like this is nonsense. And when I'm saying this nonsense, I'm not saying that good and evil don't exist. Absolutely, they do exist, and there's I'm gonna have some really interesting things to talk to you guys about in terms of like what's actually happening in the world right now and how it is explained like on a cosmic level scale. We'll get to that in the next couple of videos probably. But this so essentially like the defining point of all this is that uh, binary is not something the creator chooses arbitrarily. It's the minimal logically necessary structure for wholeness to appear as form without ceasing to be whole. Axiom 5. The field of reality is non-local and operates identically to a runtime map. And when I say runtime map, I'm coming back to this computing analogy. So on a computer, a runtime map essentially is what allows there to be apparent causality. It allows for certain things to happen and to be resolved, and then for other things to still be in unresolved potential. So when I say field, what I'm talking about is this non-local substrate that underpins all experience and all causality and all manifestation. And this field, it's not a god or a force or a spirit. It doesn't have its own agenda. And in the New Age spiritual circles, they like to call it the universe. I used to call it the mirror. I wrote about in my first book, I wrote about calling it the mirror. I've determined at this point that was wrong. It's not a mirror. In a lot of ways, it does seem to operate that way, but a mirror is just an instant reflection, and that's not how physical experience happens. Things take time to sort of coalesce together. They don't happen instantly in most cases. In some they do, but in many they don't. So this field is essentially the totality of everything that seems external to you, but it's also the body you inhabit and the body I'm inhabiting and the bodies everybody else is inhabiting. And it's also the playing field of reality itself. So everywhere you go, uh, whatever you're sitting on, the room that you're in, it's everything. That's what I mean by the field. And the field operates analogously to this runtime map concept because reality can't remain coherent without something separating what has already happened from what hasn't, what's still possible and what's already been resolved and what can follow from what. So if all events and possibilities simply existed in like one undifferentiated mass, there wouldn't be a sequence. There wouldn't be apparent causality and no before and after, and you just wouldn't have intelligible experience. So a runtime map, as it operates in computing, it holds essentially the same structure. So it's like the live ordering structure by which experience is rendered moment by moment. It's what holds the active state of reality in place so that one event can follow another without contradiction. It determines what is currently possible, what's already been locked in, what remains unresolved, and which future outcomes still fit coherently with everything that already rendered. And this is why it can't be reduced to just a simple mirror. So reality is always already in motion. So countless sequences are already underway. Different conditions are already active. Different domains already carrying their own encoded history. So the field has to do more than just reflect. It has to render within a live structure that preserves continuity. And that's exactly what a runtime map does on a computer. So it's like the field's live recording of active relational state of the act. It's the field's live recording of active relational state. So it keeps track of where each node stands within the rendered sequence of experience, which branches remain visible, which conditions are active, which meanings have already been encoded, and which outcomes remain coherent from that point. So in computing, it's easy to see a program doesn't just contain instructions. It also has a current state. That state matters because the same command can produce different outputs depending on what is already loaded into memory, what variables are active, what permissions are present, and what conditions have already been met, and what sequence of operations came before. So without that live state tracking, computer could not operate coherently, and reality requires the same kind of structure. So once you start to see this clearly, you can see that sequence exists because the map preserves order. Delay exists because outcomes are rendered through a live structure, not as isolated fragments. Stability exists because the map must preserve coherence across active experience. The same action can lead to different results because the surrounding runtime state is different. And this is a reason that this has been so complicated, and nobody's been able to really figure out how manifestation works in recorded history, as far as I could tell. I've not found anybody who's been able to really nail this down. So this idea that the same action can lead to different results is why I think one of the biggest reasons that it becomes so confusing for people, because you can do the same thing at different times, and because you're doing it for different reasons, reality renders differently. So, all right, last axiom, number 6. Causality slash manifestation is governed by internal state, which is a combination of what I would call your signal slash your frame slash your alignment. I really tried to find like one word that described exactly what it's describing, but I just couldn't find one. And this whole idea, it's not simple to sort of box it into one category in itself because there's so many moving parts to it. What I mean by frame is the meaning that you apply to yourself, the world, others, and the events that happen. So, I guess before I get into that, I should talk about the fact that I wrote in the book that it's belief that causes manifestation, and I had thought that for a long time. However, I've had too many instances where like I believed like something bad was going to happen, and then like something good happened, you know? So there's certainly it's not belief. I mean, belief is sort of a catch-all term that you can use that most people would just like passively agree with. But the more you analyze it, the more I've analyzed it, the deeper I've gotten into it, I've realized that it's not really belief. I mean, belief sort of works because it's it fits in with these other terms I'm using, but it's not the actual catalyst. So I just explain what the frame is. The signal is sort of like your emotive amplitude plus your confidence plus clarity. So like the more clarity you have as a whole, like the easier that it's going to be for things to work out in your favor. Most specifically because the most difficult thing to do is to manifest positively when you're stuck in your head. And this, I imagine, is the reason that nobody's been able to figure this out. Because in order to analyze, to understand it, you have to get in your head and you have to analyze everything that's going on in there. And because if you're starting from the premise, as I did, that internal state or like something internally from my mind is causing things to happen in reality, then I need to analyze everything that's going on in my mind, everything that's occurring, all the thoughts that are happening, and I need to be able to catch myself when they're occurring. And when you're constantly stuck in your head like this, it makes outcomes basically impossible. And the reason for this is because being stuck in your head essentially means that you're questioning how aligned you are while trying to be aligned, which any rational person can understand that if you have to ask whether or not you're aligned, then you're immediately like not aligned because you're 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 analyzing whether or not you're aligned. If you're asking, then you're not. When you're aligned, that just means like you're immersed. You're immersed in what you're doing. You're 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 present in the moment and you're witnessing life unfolding. And you cannot do this when you're in your head thinking about what outcomes are happening or if you're screwing something up or what did I do that caused this? What did I do that caused that? So anybody who delves into this deeply enough, their life's gonna fall apart because I can tell you that's what happened in mine. It really like everything stopped for me. I went into a period of like complete stasis where essentially nothing happened in my world. I just sat there and day by day, it's like nothing would change. And so what this really comes down to is that essentially competence is not really all that necessary for manifesting positive outcomes because what I know about myself, like I already like I've been a world class poker player for over a dozen years, so I know that like when I'm sitting down to play a session of poker, I know what decisions to make. I know what I'm doing when I sit down, and when I would go through these periods of like everything in my life falling apart, I just lose every single day. It wouldn't matter how good my decisions were. It wouldn't matter how bad my opponents were. They would just either catch a lucky card or they would have a hand that just wasn't good enough to pay me off in a spot where I finally did get a hand, which was very far and few between. And what this essentially means is that competence is really only necessary in so much as you have the clarity that you know what you're doing and you're making good decisions. So like in poker, for example, like even though I still had that clarity of knowing I was making good decisions, that still wasn't enough during these periods where everything was just like in stasis or everything was just like turning bad for me. And I'm gonna have like all sorts of examples of situations that occurred that sort of describe like this is how I figured this out about it and this is how I figured this other thing out about it and I'll get into those, but I'm not going to do that in this video. The other thing I'm going to say about this is that this concept of wholeness and lack are these concepts are essential. They're like uh, at the very root of this. You can think of it as a spectrum of wholeness versus lack. So what reality is doing or what the runtime map is doing is it's not reading the words that you're actually saying or that you're actually thinking. It's reading between the lines of what you're saying and deducing what the underlying motivation is that you're holding towards something or towards a situation. So, and there's another reason that it's, I'm sure is really thrown a lot of people off trying to understand this, because like for some people, what's it, affirmations work, and for most people, some affirmations work. Definitely, I've had many affirmations work for me, but the thing is that affirmations can't work if there's some sort of underlying conflict. And there are three primary distortions that I've come to understand. And these distortions are manipulation, ownership, and management. And so essentially so manipulation is like taking like strategizing. And for a long time I thought that this distortion was like just any kind of strategy in any situation itself is a distortion. But eventually what I came to realize is that no, it's when you're strategizing because something hasn't been working out for you, that's when it's a distortion. And the reason is because the fact that you're engaging in strategy because it's not working implies that you're engaging in it from a position of lack. Now, if like you're just strategizing about like what the best course of approach for something is, there's nothing wrong with that. But when you're doing it from a place of I need to make this work, I'm strategizing because I need to change what's happening in reality to go in my favor, then you're encoding lack. Ownership is taking ownership of problems in your life. And this is probably like the best advice I could give to anybody about this is do not frame yourself as having problems. Do not focus on problems in your life. If there's a problem, just ignore it. Don't make it into something that bigger than it is. Deal with it, deal with it in whatever way you have to. Don't dwell on it. Just focus, like you want the majority of your attention and your focus towards the things that you love, towards the things that like make you feel alive. So like there's no ultimate strategy or technique. There's no technique at all. You cannot like you can't strategize, you can't create a technique to manifest things for yourself. All like in in reality, like you're never really manifesting anything. It's all the map is doing it, and it's doing it based on your attention and whether or not you've encoded distortions. So like when you're like completely focused on something that you love and like what I would say to anybody, just pour all of your attention into that and then don't worry about any of the other domains. Just let them come to you. Because what's going to happen is like the more of the allotment of your attention that you have focused on the thing that you love, when that's working for you, which if you love doing it, then you're gonna want to keep doing it just to do it rather than doing it because you like the outcome that you get, then you're not like in your head about anything. You're just focused on your thing and you're just moving forward. And when you do that, all the other domains in your life can just take care of themselves as long as you've not like encoded lack in any way towards those domains. So, okay, so ownership, yeah, ownership is like presuming that it's yours to fix. And with anything going on with the body specifically, most specifically, this is the only advice because you cannot frame the body into health. You can't like it doesn't work. I haven't really like thought deeply about why that is, but I've just noticed in too many circumstances that once I stop focusing on something being the case, it stops being the case after enough time. And then the other distortion is management, which essentially means this is a thing that I need to act in order to make sure it works out in my favor. And so management is a form of ownership because you're taking ownership to manage this outcome. So you can't manage outcomes. What you can do is frame yourself correctly. Don't encode distortions. Focus your attention on the thing that you love, and pour it all into that. And don't focus on problems. Don't focus on things that are going wrong. If something goes wrong, that's fine. Like just don't make it a thing. All right. This concept of immersion is very very important because hold on. I think I already talked about immersion, and I don't want to keep repeating myself because I know I did that a couple of times. So let me just get back towards this computing analogy to sort of explain this. So when you type a command into a terminal, the computer doesn't just read the words. It reads the command itself, like what you're asking it to do, the parameters, which are like the specific inputs, the environment state, which is like the directory, the user permissions, and the system variables, and then it determines whether there are flags, which are like options that modify how the command runs. So the computer reads whether the command is executable given the current state. So if you're in the wrong directory, it'll fail. If you lack permissions, it'll fail. If the syntax is wrong, it'll fail. So the command that you give is like your thoughts or spoken statements or your actions. Oh, that's one thing I didn't talk about. action. So you you don't always like some frames are just implied. So the map will read like you don't even have to have a thought about something. But if you take a specific action and you're doing it for a specific reason, the map is creating an implied, or you are creating an implied frame, and the map is reading that. So you don't really have to say anything in some instances, but what you're doing, it's creating a frame, and you can figure out what that frame is if you just like spend some time deducing it. So your actions absolutely contribute to your frame, and the parameters are the specific details of what meaning you've encoded, and then the environment state is like your current signal. And then the flags are whether the frame carries distortion. So the field reads all of these simultaneously. So in programming terms, if you've encoded distortion via lack, this is like having a global variable called uh, is underscore whole defaulting to false. And this is how it works. It's like we're essentially inside one big computer. However, I wouldn't say that it's like a sim. It seems like a simulation because computer simulations operate very similarly to how this place operates. And obviously, I'm using this analogy because it fits so well. But I wouldn't say that we're in a computer simulation. It just sort of seems like it. This is way too complex for anything that a computer could do. A computer can't insert consciousness units into bodies and then create bodies that, I don't know if it could create bodies that age. I doubt it. Anyways, no matter what command you type, if that is whole defaults to false, then it's like the system's returning like error, lack detected, and then it's producing like negative manifestation. So, or the manifestation just be blocked, or it could be distorted. And what I mean by distorted is like you're you're wanting one thing and it's giving you something similar to that, but like not completely not in the way that you're wanting it. So if that's happening, like you've encoded distortion somehow. So historically, both fortune and misfortune, people attributed to like the gods, as if invisible hands pulled the strings of life. But what people were calling the gods were actually their unconscious frames and their underlying motivations that the map was reading, rendered by the field. So, I mean, even today, people still like outsource their own agency and attribute events to luck or fate or mysterious forces, never realizing that their own frame was setting the terms for what happened. But the field, it doesn't render the frame in isolation. It reflects the total signal broadcast at any moment. And this broadcast is composed of like the correctness of your frame, the clarity, the signal strength, the emotive amplitude, and the presence. And you don't really need to know all these things to be a good manifester. To be a good manifester, all you gotta do is like focus on the thing you love, and then don't worry about anything else. You just do that, like you'll be good. But like I've gone so far dissecting this that I can't seem to help myself but keep going. Uh, I'm gonna get way more into this in some other video because I have a ton to say about it. But this one's already long enough, so let me just move on to conclude this. So the strength of this framework is not just its internal logic, but its power to make sense of patterns, puzzles, and anomalies that mainstream science and traditional philosophy leave unexplained or dismiss as coincidence. With the logic of wholeness, the binary frame, and the runtime map, you can see why phenomena that seem mysterious or even magical are nothing more than the field reflecting collective and individual frames at every scale. And I've listed a number of real world examples that this framework explains very easily. Things like wisdom of the crowds, momentum, like having a hot hand or winning and losing streaks. The Mandela effect, that's probably the most interesting one because that actually it sort of reveals the structure of reality. For a long time, I didn't really understand this Mandela effect or what it meant or what it was showing, but now I see it. It's that and this is what allowed me to connect manifestation to quantum mechanics was that when you see what the Mandela effect's doing is it's allowing different people to experience different realities and to have different histories. And when you look at like eyewitness testimony, what you find is that it's like extremely unreliable. That like more than half the time people are saying that they had a completely different experience of reality than others uh, have said that they experienced while they were in the same place and saw the same thing. And so this is happening on a massive scale. We're each in our own little bubbles. No one's having some sort of shared experience. Do shared experiences happen? Yes, but in general, most of the time that's not what's happening. What's happening is we're constantly splitting off into our own experienced realities where our frame is being rendered through the other person. However, the other person is also splitting off into their own reality where their frame is being rendered by a what I would call a NPC version of the other. So we're not interacting with the real other person a good bit of the time. We're interacting with like a computerized rendered version of them. So what's happening in the Mandela effect is people are experiencing completely different histories. That's how all those people can remember Nelson Mandela being dead. But what the Mandela effect shows us is that at some point reality has to patch together a compatible history that's coherent. So that's why you have all of these different people having different memories of different experiences. And what this means about how reality operates is that it works as this term that I would call patchwork retrofitting. So what it's doing is in once at some point, okay, so in quantum mechanics, they have this thing called decoherence. And now I'm not like a physics expert or anything like this. I only know a little bit about it, but I'm able to like understand when I'm like reading something, I can put together two and two and say, oh, this maps to this. So I might not have everything completely perfect, but the general idea I know I can put in a book, and I'm sure like any physicist that can read it can say like, yeah, that's like this is consistent with how quantum mechanics works. So just bear with me. Decoherence. What's happening there is all these different potential um, realities are available, and you are sort of switching, or not, you're not switching between them, but you're tuning to one of them with your frame and your signal and your alignment. And when you're not aligned, you aren't tuning to the signals, or you aren't tuning to the realities where the good thing happens for you. You're tuning to ones that stasis happens, or bad things happen. And eventually this decoherence, it has the way, so they have this thing called wave function collapse, and that's when all the alternate history or futures that could happen have to collapse back in to bring everybody back to the same reality, because it's constantly doing this thing where it's separating, and then people are having their own experiences, and then at some point they have to come back together. Otherwise, if they go too far in any one direction away from reality, then it becomes incoherent for everybody. So the wave function has to collapse in order for everybody to come back to this same reality. So this patchwork retrofitting means that essentially when when two alternate historical paths were present, like in the Mandela situation, eventually it has to default to one of them. So the one where Mandela died, that was like an NPC version of him, where just those people who had that experience, who are aligned with that experience, experienced that. But eventually it had to collapse back in to the where the real world where he was alive, because eventually people who thought he was dead are going to run into people who know him as alive. So at some point it has to decide, okay, this is going to be the coherent history. So really, like, there is no
real shared history at all. Like that's reality is just it's doing patchwork and it's retrofitting whatever is the most coherent history onto a shared ledger for all of us to experience. So, I mean, I have more to say on the Mandela effect, but that one was that one I think is pretty interesting. But you can see all these others here that I've said it explains, like herd mentality, market sentiment. Like so, like I can explain why you can't time the market, or like you rarely can actually do that successfully. Beginner's luck, it becomes very easy to explain why that happens. We talked in the first book already about placebo and nocebo. Um, you can see these other things here. The collective break, like the Streisand effect, it actually has to happen based on the way this framework works. Um, as I've said, quantum mechanics. I'm going to have multiple videos on quantum mechanics. It's actually pretty interesting. Particle colliders. I need to personally go deeper into that one, but that one I think is pretty interesting because I think that has something to do with what's instantiating all of these Mandela effects, these more frequent Mandela effects, especially like these small ones. That's something I have to personally go into more before I start talking about it, though. And then it advances both Western and Eastern spirituality, which I mean, Eastern in particular has been really stuck in the mud for a long time. And this is one of the more interesting things about this is that this creates an entirely new sort of spiritual path that really hasn't been written about before. And it totally negates enlightenment. What I can tell you now is that enlightenment is a spiritual bypass. And it's not something to strive for. Like there's nothing redeemable about it really. And I don't see like any value in it whatsoever. And I'll probably the next video I'll talk about that because I think that that's probably the next place to go. But we're going to talk about all these things. So that's it for this one. If you disagree with some of this, or if it was like confusing, like ask me like what I'm not trying to say that I'm like married to this. I'm also trying to say that I'm not like that I know everything, right? Because I don't. But I'm open to any perspective, and if it makes sense, it makes sense. I'm only my only alliance is or my only allegiance is to the truth, and I'm not really interested in anything else. So yeah, yeah. If you made it this far, drop me a line. Let me know what you thought, uh, and what which ideas interest you the most, and maybe I'll consider talking about those. All right, that's it. I'll talk to you guys later.